You are listening to the Booktrospective Podcast, a podcast for all types of books. And even though we read all types of books across all different types of genres, we want to give a disclaimer. Many of our books and a lot of our content sometimes is intended for mature audiences. And we don't believe in censorship, but we do want our listeners to have the opportunity to decide if our episode or podcast is good for them. So with that, let's get into the episode. Hey, it's Dominique.
And Keely.
And you are listening to Booktrospective. And this week we are doing part one of House of Flaming. I cannot speak. This week we are doing the first half of House of Flame and Shadow. Is that what it is? House of Flame and Shadow?
Yes.
I am illiterate. Anyways, House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. I cannot. House of Flaming Shadow. Well, anyways, if you're not new here, you know that we split these books into half. This book is actually in 3 parts. I'll talk about that more in a second, but it's our first half of that book. But before we get into that, Keely, how was your week?
There's a lot.
You did a lot?
It's been a lot.
We talked.
Because it's been, what?
It's really been like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So you went to New Orleans.
Yeah. Well, before that, so Saturday, Peyton wanted me to tell you this. But, so Saturday, I had Peyton and her friend Jay Sean here. They were helping me out a little bit. But before we opened, I was waiting for the mail to come because they had my, I ordered shirts from Libro FM for their 10-year anniversary, and I was waiting for those to come in. And I had the door kind of cracked, just so that he saw that we were here and he could drop them off.
Yeah.
And it was like 11:30, and somebody walks in, which the sign said closed, but it was cracked open. If I'm gonna make money, okay.
Right.
But I'm like, oh hi, how can I help you? He's like, I'm looking for book recommendations. I'm like, okay, cool. Come back here, and I'm like, what like genre are you looking for? He's like, I don't know, anything. I'm like, okay. So I grab the first book that I see, and it's Mexican Gothic. And I'm like, Mexican...
See, she can't speak either.
Mexican Gothic is a really good one, and I go to explain what it's about, and he's like, is that what you are? I said, huh? He said, Mexican. Are you Mexican? I go, no. And put the book back on the shelf, and I go and grab a different one, and he's like, middle of explaining it, he's like, what's your most expensive one? I'm like, well, it'd be this one, and it was Sociopath by Patrick Gagney, and I started explaining it. Midway explaining it, he's like, I'll take it. I'm like, okay.
Okay.
So we go up to the checkout, and he's just...
Weird.
Yeah. I'm like, okay. But yeah, so I go back to the room, and I'm like, is that what you are? Mexican? And the kids start laughing. But I'm like, that was...
Is that what you are?
Yeah,
like,
I was like,
what?
Okay. Yeah.
The weirdest people. I swear, being a business owner introduces you to the weirdest people. Mm-hmm. And no shade to you if you're weird. Like, do your weird thing. But I
love weird people, but sometimes it's a little...
jarring.
Yeah.
Is that what you are?
Yeah, I was just like, my face just went, like, blank.
No.
And I was like,
I would have said,
no.
Yes. I am Mexican Gothic.
I told somebody, and they were like, you should have said yes. I am Gothic.
Yeah, and Mexican. Mexican.
But, yeah,
Oh
so
God.
there was that. And then our trip, 12 and a half, because I drove, took Peyton and Tristan, 13 and 4. GPS said 12 and a half hours. It ended up being about 16.
Oh, dear God.
And then, like, 20 minutes from the freaking hotel, I had to stop and get gas. Because about an hour before, I made what I said was going to be the last stop to take Tristan to the bathroom at a gas station and didn't check my gas meter. And I was running low, and I was like, I need to stop. And it was after dark, and that's mistake number 1. I knew I knew. I was like, I need to make sure I'm good on gas before it gets dark, and I completely forgot. And then we pull up to this gas station, and I'm like, okay, I'm getting some vibes. So I get out, and I'm like, Peyton, lock the doors. So she does, and luckily the tank is on the driver's side.
Mm-hmm.
So I got out, and I had my back up against the car, and I was holding the gas pump because I was like, if anybody comes up on me, I'm gonna spray them with gas. Well, I'm standing there, and we're at the last pump.
Mm-hmm.
So a big black van with blacked out windows starts to pull around, and I'm like, immediately, I'm clocking it, and I'm like catching the details, So it slowly goes around the car, and then it goes around the parking lot and comes back around the car. And at that point, I'm like, oh no! So I'm taking the gas out of the car, the pump out of the car, and I'm putting it away. As I pull up into the parking spot, the gas pump right next to us. Mind you, there's 5 other pumps available. But he circles around us twice and pulls up to that one.
No.
So I'm tapping on the door. I'm like, Peyton, open up. So as I'm getting in the car, he's getting out, and he is rooting, air quotes, rooting around the trash can right beside my door. And as soon as I get in and lock the doors, we make eye contact, and he turns around and walks away.
Yeah, you freaking.
And I'm like,
I'm armed and dangerous, guys.
Peyton is shaking like a leaf.
Oh,
She's like, I was gonna get my water bottle, her tumbler. And I was going to hit him if I had to. But Tristan was homesick the minute we got there.
Aww.
And he didn't want to eat. So he was hangry too. So, and we didn't get to venture around much because he has tiny legs and he didn't want to walk.
A lot of walking.
But we did get beignets and we got jambalaya and we had a good time. I brought home 107 books. 16 of them were signed copies. So that was nice. I'm never driving that far ever again.
And I'm getting ready to drive that far. It's miserable. One more thing happened.
One more thing. Oh, yeah! How could I forget? My sister Kinley had her baby, Carson. She's so cute in a tiny little thing. I love her to pieces.
I know. Was she, is she tiny? Or
she was 6 pounds.
Oh, not too bad.
6, I can't remember how many ounces, but 19 inches. She's so cute, and she's ticklish, too. I was rubbing her down with lotion, and she's so cute.
She good? Or she cry or she sleep?
She whines a little bit. But overall, she's
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. First babies
sleeps
normally.
A lot.
First babies normally are. It's a trap. That's how they're like, oh, I can do this again. I can have a second one. No.
She's a sweet baby. She's so tiny, and she's in between that, between preemie and newborn clothes. So it's we can never get her in anything that fits.
Yeah.
But
I love it.
Tristan is obsessed with her.
Oh, I'm sure.
He's like, this is my baby, and don't touch her. Peyton is determined to be the favorite aunt, and I'm like, no, that's me. But yeah.
I love babies. I'm not ever having any more, but I love when other people have them. Well, what did I do? I didn't do anything near as interesting as what Keely has been doing. I already did my world of interest for the year, even though I'm getting ready to go to Minnesota and drive just as far, and I hate road trips. I hate them. So there's that. I've just been doing schoolwork. I hate this class, and I hate this professor. He's so anal, and it's such a control freak, and I'm like, dear God, why did I do this? So that's pretty much it. I've just been trying to get my life back in order. That's really it. So, yeah. Okay, well, House of Flame and Shadow. This is the 3rd book of the Crescent City series. So originally when Sarah was, whatever they called it, given money, paid, whatever it's called, the Crescent City was only supposed to be 3 books. But now there's a 4th, which makes sense because there's 4 houses in Lunathian. But this was technically supposed to be the last book. This book is humongous. It is 800 and something, or it's 900 pages. It's very long. I think it's 8 something, close to 9.
835.
Okay, so not as close to 9. I thought it was a little longer. Long. long. There's like a million chapters. And it was like a highly, so we waited two years for this book. Highly debated because I just believe that people had extreme expectations going into this book, and that is not always a good thing. It is, I mean, obviously we'll rate it in the next episode and all that stuff, but like, I mean, it's not like my favorite of all of her books, but it's not a bad book at all. I just think people had these huge expectations going into it, and they let themselves down. So this was a highly, highly, highly debated book. It still is over Book Talk, and you know, there's that. But all right, you have the blurb.
I do. The stunning third book in the sexy, action-packed Crescent City series, following the global bestsellers House of Earth and Blood and House of Sky and Breath. Bryce Quinlan never expected to see a world other than Midgard, but now that she has, all she wants is to get back. Everything she loves is in Midgard. Her family, her friends, her mate. Stranded in a strange new world, she's going to need all her wits about her to get home again. And that's no easy feat when she has no idea who to trust. Hunt Athalar has found himself in some deep holes in his life, but this one might be the deepest of all. After a few brief moments with everything he ever wanted, he's in the Asteri's dungeon again, stripped of his freedom and without a clue as to Bryce's fate. He's desperate to help her, but until he can escape the Asteri's leash, his hands are quite literally tied.
Okay, so this episode, we will cover chapters, well, the prologue through about chapter 47. And then we will cover the, you know, I think it might be 48 or might have to finish off 47 in the next episode through the end. And I probably will throw in some of the bonus chapters. There were 5 bonus chapters with this book, and it irritates me to death because no one's going to buy all those copies. There was like some at Barnes & Noble, some at Amazon, some at indie bookstores, yada, yada, yada.
And at
Walmart, yeah. So, like, there's lots of bonus chapters. So, if you could describe this book in one word, what would you say?
I would say stressful.
Yeah, it definitely is. I'm going to say arrogant. There's a lot of arrogance in this book, and it can be annoying, for sure. So, triggers...
attempted suicide, blood, death, demons, depression, discrimination, drugs, eugenics, gore, guilt, misogyny, murder, near-death experience, parent neglect, PTSD, racism, sex, sexism, slavery, substance abuse, suicidal ideation, violence, war.
Lengthy. So unlike the first book, the second book did not wrap up like with a nice little bow. So we ended off Crescent City 2 or House of Sky and Breath with Bryce falling into Prithian. So she went to a whole new world. Ruhn and Hunt are in the grasp of the Asteri. Cormac blew himself up. Therian deflected from the River Queen and is now under the Viper Queen's possession. Ethan was trying to save the wolf from the mystic astronomer person. Hypaxia was around. I don't really remember her doing anything. Celestina, Hypaxia's like girlfriend, sold out Bryce and her friends. Is that everyone? Those are the main people. So the first half of this book, or really, I'll just summarize this book. I think that's what I normally do. I can never remember what I do. So this book picks up right where we left off at the second book and like immediately. And so Bryce falls into Prithian. And we do get introduced to some of our ACOTAR characters, but it's not the ones you probably would expect to see. Like, there are some parts where it's some we expect, but for the most part of her time in Prithian, it's not who you would probably expect her to be spending time with. But basically, the entire time that she's in Prithian is one big history lesson. And we learn a lot of stuff, some of which is useful, some of it's just like, okay, that was history. And Ruhn, Hunt, and Baxian, the Hellhound, are all in the Asteri's dungeons, and they are being horribly tortured. And so all the people who are not either Bryce or them, so we also had Lydia, or the Hind, who we learned was a double agent in the last book. She is around trying to help out our guys in the dungeon. We don't really know what Hypaxia is up to, and Ethan is still trying to like figure out what to do with this wolf that they have named Sigrid in this book, and he is with the guy, so he's with Flynn and Declan. And so basically we kind of have three different storylines going on. We have Bryce in her Prithian journey, we have Hunt, Baxian, and Ruhn in the dungeons, and that ties into Lydia, and then we have Ethan, Flynn, Deck, and then Tharian and the like meat market. And so all of our people kind of like are in these like sticky situations, and eventually they're all able to like get back together, and basically they're trying to figure out what do we do with the Asteri, because the Asteri know everything that they're up to, and they learn a lot of disheartening information that they've already learned, and then like even more stuff in this book. And it's basically like, where do we go from here? And what does it mean now that like Bryce can world walk, basically? So that's kind of what this book is about. That's very, 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 very general. So if you do not want to be spoiled and you have not read this book or ACOTAR or any other Crescent City books, I would not listen to this episode until you do. But otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So we open up with a prologue, and it is the Hind, which is Lydia. And she is with the Asteri in like their throne room, and she's just thinking about like how she wants to kill them, but she's kneeling in front of them. Lydia's a double agent, and we know that. Pollux, the Hammer, is like Lydia's boyfriend. And he's so arrogant and like misogynistic and disgusting. But he like is kneeling next to her, but like he's still like exerting his dominance because he's kind of like touching his wing to her. And basically King Morven, which is Cormac's father and the king of Avalon Fae, and the Autumn King, or Einar, who is Bryce and Ruhn's dad, or the Autumn King, they're both been called there because obviously both of their sons and Bryce, so Autumn King's daughter, they're all like traitors. So they have been called in to like basically say like speak on these acts. Morven is like, I don't have any idea about what Cormac was doing. I tried to beat it out of him. Like I would have turned him in, and he actually like looked kind of scared because the Asteri kind of like threatened Avalon, because the Asteri don't like mess with Avalon. It's like a weird island shrouded in mist, completely like off doing its own thing. And Morven condemns Cormac and says like he won't get a grave, a burial, his name will be wiped from their house. Like dang. And the Autumn King says that neither of his kids have the right to claim his name anymore either. And Pollux says that he'll kill Bryce for killing the Harpy, because even though we know that Lydia killed the Harpy in the end of book 2, they made it look like Bryce did, because Lydia is still playing double agent. And so the Autumn King says, well, you'll have to find her. And they ask, do you not care where Ruhn is? And he's like, I know where Ruhn is. And he's in the dungeons, obviously. He's like, but do you guys know where Bryce is? And so the Asteri basically say that Bryce is no longer in Midgard. And Rigelus, who is like the head of the Asteri, says like, do not speak about what was discussed today. And they dismiss the kings. And they ask Pollux and Lydia, like, how are the interrogations going of Ruhn, Hunt, and Baxian down in the cells? We learn that the new mech suits are being assembled near the palace, and they're ready to use, and they don't even require pilots now. So like, they can really just they're like rechargeable, and they can just do terrible things without any pilots. And Lydia wonders like, why do they need to use the mystics to find Bryce? Because the Asteri also have their own mystics as well. And so they're basically having the mystics look for Bryce. And she's like, if Bryce is in hell, like, why don't they just look in hell? Like, why do they have to use the mystics? And she's like, okay, maybe Bryce went somewhere else. And Lydia tells Pollux like she's trying to keep the men alive as bait for Bryce to come home. Hunt, Ruhn, and Baxian are like being hung up by these shackles in the dungeon, and there's literally like blood below them and like pee and like just all kind of bodily fluids, and they're like unconscious. And Ruhn looks at her with just so much hate, and then Pollux hits them with whips, and he literally has like ripped out all of Ruhn's piercings. He's cut off Baxian and Hunt's wings, and Lydia tries to mind speak with Ruhn, but he blocks her out. So we go to part 1, and it is called The Drop. So Bryce is in a dungeon, and there is a petite fae and 2 male faes, which we will learn is Amren, Rhys, and Azriel. And Amren basically asks her, like, where did you come from? And Bryce is trying to ask, like, where am I? And we know from the description that Bryce is in, well, I guess if you didn't read ACOTAR first, you didn't know. I know. But she is in Rhys's dungeons in the Hewn City. And it has like that always has like that hissing sound and those animals down there. Really, these are like Azriel's dungeons. So whatever. So Rhys basically, like, when they got to the townhouse, he like grabbed her hand and like winnowed them to the dungeons. And Amren and Rhys can understand her because she's speaking in the Old Fae language, but Azriel cannot. So Amren asks her, like, why are you covered in someone else's blood? And Bryce asks, like, why do you guys no longer, or, like, she's basically trying to figure out why they no longer speak the old language and why has it been 15,000 years since they did, because that's what Amren said. No one spoke that language in 15,000 years. And Amren asks, like, why do you have the sword Gwydion, which we know is the Star Sword? And Bryce says it's a family heirloom brought to her world 15,000 years ago. So they just keep talking about this 15,000. And Rhys asks, like, how did you find this world? And she says a friend thought that he could send her to hell, but she ended up here. She doesn't want to let them know about the horn or the gates or her power. And she tells them that they have gates in her world that open into hell. And she's basically like doing like half truths, and like she's like in her mind, she's like, I'm just going to spin a bunch of bullshit basically. And Azriel smiles because he knows, like, he can read her body language. And she knows that he's reading her body language. And I just want to say that, like, one of the theories was like that Bryce... I don't love like Bryce and Hunt, cause I don't love Hunt, but like one of the theories was that like Bryce and like Azriel would have got together, and I was like, yes, give me that. I would have lived for that. Like, that would have been such a nice couple, but nevertheless. So basically Azriel like says something to Rhys because he knows that she's lying, and Amren tells Rhys to look into her mind, and then Rhys like mind speaks to her, and he's like, oh, you've done this before basically, and she's like, yeah. And he says, well, can I have permission to see like your memories? And she's like, no. And he says, okay, I'm not gonna like just take them from you. He says, I'll rely on your words. And then he summons like 3 chairs, and they all just like sit down. And so now he officially introduces Amren and Azriel by their names. And Bryce says that the sword was brought to her world by Thea and Peleus, and Amren recognizes those names. And Bryce says, this is where my ancestors migrated from. And Amren says and then Bryce says, we have no memory of it though. And Azriel says, well, there's no record of us migrating anywhere. And Rhys tells her that, we're not going to torture you, but we will leave you in the dungeon until you decide to talk. And Rhys asks if there's others that will come looking for her. And she says, no, they've been looking for 15,000 years and they can't find it. And so then he snaps his finger and he does that thing where he like makes you look clean, but you don't actually feel clean. And Bryce tells them how the Asteri found Midgard and about the Northern Rift. And Rhys asks, like, who are the Asteri? And she tells them that they basically take our power and they like eat it and it powers them and like all this stuff. And Amren's like, that sounds like the tithe. And Bryce tells him that, yeah, she saw the Asteri's like archives, and that's kind of how she knew about this world. And Amren says that those beings sound like the Daglin. So the Asteri in Prythian were known as the Daglin. And Bryce asks, well, how did you guys defeat the Daglin? And Amren doesn't know. And Bryce is just thinking that, like, Rhys is terrifying, but, like, terrifyingly hot. And it's funny because she actually thinks that Rhys is more beautiful than Azriel, and most people think, like, Azriel is, like, the most beautiful, like, even though Rhys is also, like, beautiful. But, I love scary Rhys. And Bryce can't explain, like, her world to them. Like, she's trying to explain, like, guns and weapons and, like, all the other Fae worlds are like old-timey, like medieval or whatever. So she's like trying to explain that to them. So she does extend her hand and she's like, here, look at it. But Rhys disappears and he comes back with that like orb thing that he used with the queens, the human queens, and like Akawar, I think. And it's so like she can put her memories in it. But she's like, oh, you guys can teleport. And basically she learns that like a lot of them can winnow. They call it winnowing. She calls it teleporting. And it's interesting to her because like nobody in her world can really do it except for like her and Cormac. So Rhys comes back with the orb. She puts her memories in there and she shows them the guns, the Omega suits, or the mech suits, the boats, like all the bombing, all that stuff. And she believes that she was sent there by Erd instead of going to hell for the answers. And she thinks that Azriel's sword is the sword that they mention in history because they have like this like prophecy. It says like when the sword and knife are united, so our people shall be, or something like that. And Rhys gives her this like little bean to swallow, and it's basically to help her like be able to communicate with them. So she does, but then as soon as she does, she kind of like blacks out, and then she erupts starlight, and her like the horn is exposed on her back. And Amren looks at it and she's like, these letters are the same as the words in the Book of Breathings. And Azriel's like, explain or die. We go to chapter 2, and we learn that Therian the idiot, idiot number 1, is now a Viper Queen meat market fighter. And he is basically like in the bathroom, he got beat up or whatever. And we learn like he can't get in the river anymore because the River Queen will come after him. So they have like some special like tub constructed for him to like get wet every day. And Ari comes in, which Ari is the dragon that Ethan stole from the astronomer in the last book. Her full name is Ariadne, but they call her Ari. And basically they're like the prize fighters of the Viper Queen, so they share like this suite. And he kind of flirts with her, and she tells him like, you always flirt, but I know that that's just like your shield basically. And Therian confronts her about ditching Bryce that night at the bar when like they got attacked. And Ari says like, I already knew that you guys expected the worst of me, but Therian says we actually didn't. And he like leaves, and he like runs into like some mayors, and everyone basically that's like water people, like they call him a traitor and a loser for like defecting from the River Queen. And we learned that Therian's parents are still alive, but they are like super ashamed of him, and his mom like wrote him a letter and was like, I'm ashamed of you. And the Viper Queen comes in, and she's pissed because Therian like kills his opponents too fast. She tells him that he blows his load basically. And like, cause she wants a show, like she wants him to drag it out, and he's just like, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. And so because he did like killed his person in 5 minutes, she like punished Ari and made her like drag out her fight. And so she summons him, and basically not only is he like working for her, but he also like drinks her venom, which is like a drug. And we switch over to Ethan, idiot number 2. So Ethan is with Flynn and Deck, and he wants to save Therian, but Flynn is like, Captain Whatever will be just fine. Like, he makes his own choices. And Ethan asks like, oh, so like Ruhn's life means more, and Flynn's like, Ruhn's in a dungeon where he did not choose to be. Therian chose to like come here and be an idiot. And Flynn says, like, go home and take that one with you, talking about Sigrid. So we'll learn that the wolf that he saved from the Mystics, she doesn't know her name. So they just started calling her Sigrid. And Ethan had found out that basically Sigrid's dad had been Sabine's brother. And because Sabine wanted to be the heir, she challenged him and he lost. But he actually wasn't killed. He was exiled. And that is when Sigrid was born. And we also have the fire sprite. So there's 4 of them, I believe, that Ethan had stolen from the astronomer when he stole the dragon and had freed them. So the fire sprites follow Sigrid around everywhere. And Flynn tells Ethan, like, it's stupid for her to be out here. Like, if Sabine finds her, she'll ambush us. And basically after Ethan had saved her, he took her to like the frat house, and no one ever even like showed up looking for her or asking, After Ethan saved her, he took her to like their house, and no one has even like showed up looking for Ruhn or like asking like where Ruhn is. And basically like the story is that Ruhn's on vacation. Like, do they go on vacation in this world? I don't feel like they go on vacation. So Sigrid has like found this satyr shop where the astronomer goes a lot, and like she's just so feisty and like attacky. Like, she's like, why do you sell this? What do you do this for? Like, I don't know. So Ethan and the guys are talking about saving Ruhn. And they want to basically see if they can get him to that, like, Omega ship or Mare ship or whatever it was called. But Therian is the only one who has contacts with that ship. So they agree that they're going to talk to Therian to figure out a plan. But they are like, Ethan, you have to tell Sigrid that she has to go home. And Sigrid, like, does not like to be touched or be called Sigrid either. We learned that she did make the drop while she was in the tank. But she's just like super weird. Like, they have to tell her to bathe, and like she's just real messed up. She's got PTSD. So they're going to leave, and then Ethan is like, I smell wolves. Like, there's wolves nearby. So we switch back over to Bryce and Reese is asking about the tattoo, and Amryn says that she can sense something in it and for them to go get Nesta. So Nesta comes and says like, there's something made here, and Bryce is like, what does made mean? But they all leave, and so Bryce is just basically left down here. They give her food, and like she's like, the food is the same as at home. Like, that's interesting. And she's trying to think of ways to get out, and the door isn't locked, but basically Reese has up wards. But there's no gates here. They took her sword, and she's like, these Fae are just as terrible as the one at home. So we switch back over to Ethan, and Flynn tells Ethan that, they should have left Sigrid at home, and now they're trying to figure out a way to escape. And Ethan is like, we should just go to the angels. But Flynn says, like, Isaiah might turn us over to Celestina, who Ethan still thinks Celestina is cool because they've never told, I don't even think the guys know, but they don't know that Celestina flipped on them. So before they can even exit, Sabine is like blocking their exit, and she tells Sigrid that you look exactly like him, talking about her brother. So we go over to Hunt and the guys in the dungeon, and they're just hanging. And it's funny because Hunt's referred to as Prince Hunt Athelard Dannon because he takes Bryce's last name because she's the princess. It's interesting. And so they're just hanging there, and Pollux and the Hawk come in to punish them. And Hunt is like looking in the corner, and he like doesn't know if he's hallucinating or not, but he feels like the shadows are watching him. And Ruhn is just thinking like this is like so much worse than his father's torture. And Lydia tries to mind speak to Ruhn, but he's too weak to block her, otherwise he would. And she tried to touch him, and he like flinched away from her. And he's already heard like what his father said when they were like summoned and how they threw them under the bus, basically. So Lydia tried to explain like, you know, I had to do it, blah, 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 blah. But Ruhn literally says like, F you. And he doesn't want anything to do with her. So Sabine, back with Ethan, Sabine says, like, I knew my brother had lied about how many pups he had. And Sigrid growls at her, and she's like, I went in that tank to feed my sister, and you killed her because Sabine killed all the other kids. And Flynn shoots Sabine in her face. And I said, why don't you kill her? But they don't.
Yeah.
And it's stupid.
It could have been over.
Could have been over. But hey, whatever. So they run, and Ethan tells them to stop because he's like, all of the other wolves that were around have gone quiet. And then the Viper Queen appears. Back over to Ruhn and the guys in the dungeon. Lydia is talking to, or actually over to Lydia, I guess. Lydia went to go talk to Rigulus because she wants to see the Fire Sprite Queen, Erithus. And she tells him that she's going to use Erithus for torture, like for the guys. And she goes down to see the mistress of the mystics, who are the mystics in the Asteri's palace. And the mistress is like, I don't want you to take her. Like, does she have to go? But Lydia's basically like the Asteri's favorite, so she kind of gets whatever she wants. So they give her a week to like use Erithus, basically. And we switch back over to Bryce, and Bryce has decided that she's going to go down in this drain. And I don't think there's anything on this earth that would make me go down in this drain, because no. But she decides she's going to go down in this drain. And she sees, like, she looks down in there, and she's like, the beasts look like the Sobex, which are like the monsters in the river that eat you if you like don't make it across at your sailing, basically. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't be going down there. Nope. And she's like, I know that Ruhn and Hunt would tell me not to do it, but Danica would tell me to do it, so I'm gonna do it. God, Danica. God. So she jumps in there. Back over to the Viper Queen. The Viper Queen takes Therian, and I'm sorry, this book jumps around like every 5 seconds, so you're just going to have to hang in with me. So the Viper Queen takes all of the guys to Therian's apartment, and Therian is in there drugged out, and they're like, damn, you look bad. Back to Bryce. Bryce jumps down, and they don't attack her because her star is glowing, and it's like it keeps them at bay. And she sees a tunnel, and she gets to it. It's like as soon as she gets to the tunnel, then like they like reconverge. So whatever her starlight is, like keeps the beast back. Back to Ethan. Ethan updates Therian on their plan and about Sigrid and everything, but he's just high. Like he's like, I'm here, dude. I'm just here. But Sigrid is like panicking because she's like, I feel trapped again. And Ethan's like, it's going to be fine. We'll get out of here. But she snaps at him and she's like, your friends are stupid and you're stupid and your plans are stupid. And kind of fair. Kind of fair. So back to Bryce. She decides to go down this tunnel. And she's walking. And then she gets tired and falls asleep. Absolutely not. You decided to take a nap after you went in the tunnel. Why didn't you take the nap before you went in the tunnel? You should have went to sleep in the cell. So she wakes up. And Nesta's there, like, hello, friend. And she says, basically, the shadow said that you went through the grate. Like, you think you were alone in that cell? No, ma'am. So Nesta is like, let's just walk back. But Bryce is like, nope, I'm not going back that way. And so she starts shooting her star around, and she runs. And, like, shadows grab her, and she hits a wall, and she's able to break through them, like, with her light, and she's running. And Nesta grabs her and holds a sword to her throat. And then the cave caves in. So there's no way they can go back. They can only go forward. And Bryce basically says, like, well, my star is pointing me forward anyway. So Nesta's like, well, then lead. So we go over to Lydia, and she gets the Fire Sprite Queen. And she takes her to see this prisoner known as a hag, Hildy. And that is where Lydia, so Lydia had put her communication crystal that she used with Ruhn on Hildy. And that's why Hildy's locked up in here. But basically, Hildy, starts talking about Lydia, talking about, because I guess Hildy's part of Flame and Shadow, and she's like, your mom was weak like your sister, and she never should have got rid of you, blah, 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 blah. And Hildy is actually the one who put the slave collar on Aerithus and originally gave Hunt his halo tattoo. So Lydia frees Aerithus and she wants her to burn Hildy. But Aerithus won't burn her because she's like, I won't attack someone who can't fight back, yada, yada, yada. So Lydia leaves. And we go back over to Bryce. So Bryce and Nesta are still walking and they run into like this chasm and there's like a small bridge. And Nesta's like about to like walk with it. She's like, this seems like a really good place for an ambush. And Nesta tells her like no one's ever been down here before. And Nesta actually volunteered to come get her because her intuition just told her she should. So they like start walking across this like rope bridge, whatever. And they hear like talons like scratching. Ugh, I don't know. So Nesta like lights her sword, her ataraxia, with her silver flames. So Nesta does still have powers. Like if you read ACOTAR and you read Silver Flames and everybody's like, I don't know if Nesta has powers, yada. Nesta obviously still has powers. So she lights the flame, the sword with flames. And so they're the beasts that are like with the talons, they're like trying to get to them. But all of a sudden an Alaskan bullworm emerges. Or the Midgard worms. I'm sorry, I cannot think about the Midgard worm without thinking about SpongeBob. Like, I just cannot not picture the Alaskan bullworm. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, an Alaskan bullworm emerges. That's literally what I put in my notes. But the Midgard worm like comes out and literally like eats all of the creatures. And Bryce is like, what is that? And so Nessa says it's a Midgard worm. And she's like, Midgard? Like Midgard? Like, did this come from my world? And Nesta tells her that, you know, she's never seen it in real life before, but her sister Feyre has worm paintings, which, Feyre, stop painting the worm, okay? No one wants to relive that. No one wants to relive that. But anyway, so Feyre's been painting the worm, so Nesta knows what it looks like. And Nesta tells Bryce that Thea had been a high queen here before she left, and Bryce wonders if she has some claim to a throne. So, back with Hunt. He's staring at the shadows are staring back. And he, like, is hanging up still, and his wings itch because they're starting to grow back in. And he thinks about, like, you know, he's like, I knew better than to get involved in all this. I shouldn't have let Bryce get involved. And so, all of a sudden, he smiles at the shadows. And so, the shadows smile back. And the shadows say, you would do well in hell. And it is Apollyon, one of the Prince of Hell. I think is he the Prince of the Pit? I think he might be the Prince of the Pit. And he says that Bryce isn't in hell. Because Hunt's like, you know, where's Bryce? And he's like, not in hell. But he's like, let me go check. 1 second. So he leaves. He comes back with Adis. And basically they suspect that they know where Bryce might be. But they don't tell Hunt. And they say that they want him to do what he was bred to do. And why his father brought him into life. And he's like, I don't have a father. And they say that you've been asking all the wrong questions. And they tell him that the halo is no new device used by the Asteri. Like, this is an old tool, basically, a black crown. And they leave. So we switch back over to Therion's apartment. Everyone in there is asleep. And Flynn tells Therion, like, you're such an idiot for doing this. Like, why would you deflect and come to the Viper Queen? And he's like, I didn't have a choice, basically. And basically, he tells them that Cormac is dead. And they're talking, like, about him getting out, and Ari is like, the Viper Queen is never going to let him go. And Therion basically agrees, like, because they're basically like, okay, you defected from the River Queen, you can defect from the Viper Queen. Like, okay, that's a wonderful plan. But they're like, okay, so Therion agrees to do it, and he's like, but we know that she'll only agree to let me go if it's for a trade. And Ari says that there's a pretty blonde female with the Viper Queen right now, and Flynn knows, like, this is Lydia. Back over in Prythian, Bryce is like still following her star, and her and Nesta are still walking. And the tunnels here are like adorned in like artwork about the Fae. Like, some of them depict like a bloody war, enslaved humans. There's Fae like kneeling down, being crowned by humanoid figures. And the Fae are offering up their starlight. And then there's a drawing of like a noble female who's labeled Celine. And Bryce realizes that this artwork is like warning of a trap ahead, and she saves Nesta's life, basically like, do you see those holes? Like, you know, spears could come out of them or all kinds of stuff. And Nesta tells Bryce that Rhys is like the High Lord, basically, because she's like, do you guys have a king or whatever? And she's like, no, like he's the High Lord. We have 7 High Lords and a High Lady. And Bryce asks, like, Nesta asks, why didn't you just let me get killed? And Bryce says, like, I don't really have a reason to let you get killed. And then Bryce hears movement, and Nesta's like, no, it's just the shadows. Which I was like, no, it's just Azriel.
Yeah.
Like, this entire time, Azriel was in the cell with you. Like, this is Azriel. But, okay. Like,
the shadows.
The shadows. All right, so back over with Lydia. She basically comes out of the Viper Queen's office and she talks to like the group, like Ethan and them, and she reveals that she is Agent Daybright. And she's like, look, I have this plan to free the guys from the dungeon and save Ruhn, and will you guys help me? And like Flynn's immediately like, no, hell no, like this is a trap. And she tells them like, look, I need Declan to hack into the prison cameras, and I need Therian to like be my ally and advocate on the depth charger after the rest goes. So the plan is to get them out of the like Asteri dungeon into the depth charger, like that boat in the water. And Lydia tells them that like, okay, I know when you guys just like tried to storm this like palace, it didn't work, but she's like, it didn't work because Celestina sold you guys out. And Flynn's like, you're literally like the heart of evil. Like, why would I ever believe that? And Flynn says, like, don't listen to her. But Lydia says, I've been doing everything I can to save them and to slow down Pollux and keep them off your scent. She says, in 3 days, I'm going to try and save them regardless of your help or not. And they ask if Ruhn knows that she's a double agent. And she says yes. And she admits that, like, they weren't supposed to really, identify themselves, but things went too far. But she's like, Ruhn is very valuable to me. And Lydia hands over the white stone, which is what she's used to summon the depth chargers the other times, like in book 2. And she says, like, the ship will take them to Pangera, which is the continent on Midgard where the Eternal City lives, or is, which is, like, where the Asteri Palace is. And Lydia's like, I'll be waiting there for you. So Lydia goes and talks to the fire sprites that are always with Sigrid. And basically, she's like, you know, can I trust your queen, basically? And they're like, absolutely, you can trust her. So we go back over to Prythian, and Bryce is continuing to study the carvings. And now she sees one that depicts, like, a masked crowned queen with, like, these tools in her hand. And it's surrounded by Pegasus. And there's another one that depicts an ancient Fae king and queen, like, sitting on these thrones in front of a mountain. And the mountain has 3 stars above it. And, like, well, we obviously know that's Ramiel and the symbol of the Night Court. And then there's also a depiction of, like, a hellscape. So Nesta explains, like, how she became Fae. And Bryce is like, oh, so, like, you used to be human. Like, I'm half Fae. So they kind of are bonding over that. And she wonders if she can trust Nesta since she, like, is like, oh, does she, like, care about humans, basically. So her star is still leading them, and they end up running into this river. And Bryce is like, well, I'm going to jump in. And so, like, she jumps in, and Nesta's like, what the? So she jumps in after her, and then they get out, and she's like, you didn't have to do that. We could have got down here. And Bryce is like, how? And so Azriel comes out, and so he's been in the shadows the whole time. And Nesta tells her, like, Azriel could have just carried us over here, but she says, I'm not allowed to let you out of my sight. So we go back over to the guys in the prison, and Hunt tells Baxian and Ruhn that Bryce did not get to hell. And at this point in time, they've been, like, dropped into the floor into all, like, their disgustingly nasty body fluids, and they're, like, crawling around just eating, like, scraps, like, trying to have some kind of sustenance. And Ruhn wonders if Bryce is dead, and he's like, maybe the prophecy is true, like, maybe that's why there's not going to be any more royal line. And, like, he can't even taste his food because his tongue is regrowing. They literally cut out his tongue. Dear God. And Ruhn says, like, you know, we need to get out of here. And Hunt says, well, then you need to talk to Lydia. And he's like, absolutely not. And he feels stupid for, like, ever getting involved with her. So back in Prythian, Bryce learns that Nesta and Azriel's world contains only humans, Fae, and the Illyrians. And Azriel reveals that his dagger truth teller, like, basically pulls the truth from people, and that it and Bryce's swords. I cannot speak. Oh my God. Okay. Azriel says that his dagger, truth teller, pulls the truth from people, and that his dagger and Bryce's sword were both carved from a fallen meteor. And she asks him, like, okay, so, like, what's up with you being in the shadows? And he's like, I was observing. And so now Nesta has, like, lit some flames, and they're following Nesta. And she notices that Azriel has, like, regular ears, not Fae ears. And Bryce asks who made the tunnels, and Azriel's like, I don't know, like, maybe, like, the worm made the tunnels. And Bryce falls, and she scrapes her knees and her hands, and they start to walk, but as she's walking, like, they walk for days down here. And her hands will not heal, and Azriel's like, what's up with your hands, dude? Like, he's like, your hands aren't healing. And then Nesta's like, okay, well, maybe it's because she's weird. He's like, yeah, but her knees healed up. Why won't her hands heal? So Kind of weird. So Nesta tells Bryce about Lanthus and who she killed in Akasif, Silver Flames, and how she like made her sword and how it can kill the unkillable. And so Bryce is like, oh, maybe this is like gonna kill the Asteri. And Bryce says, like, you know, whenever she gets close to her sword and the dagger, Azrael's dagger, she feels weird. And Nesta says, like, yeah, it appears that so does Azrael, because Azrael's like super fidgety. And like the book, it's like every time that Bryce gets close to them, it's like they hum, like they just like want her so bad. And Bryce tells them about the prophecy about the swords coming together and freeing her people. And they ask her again about her tattoo, and she explains, like, you know, how Danica gave her the tattoo and all of that. And she said, I really didn't know what it means. And they're like, why don't you just ask her? And she's like, oh, because she's dead. Dead as a doornail. I'm just, that TikTok sound. Anyways. So go back over to Ethan, and he is trying to meet with the Viper Queen. So he waits 5 hours before she will meet with him. And she says, like, you know, Sabine's already healed up. Yeah, because you should have killed her. And Ethan says, like, you know, you don't like Sabine, do you? And she says, like, nobody likes Sabine. And she asks him, like, why didn't you kill Sabine when she was down? And he's like, honor. Oh, my gosh. You guys have honor at the worst times.
Right.
So the Viper Queen agrees that she will free Therian and his friends if Ethan agrees to participate in a private fight. And this is why Ethan's an idiot. Because he knows he's an idiot. Because he's like, dang, like, I wish... Mark is Declan's boyfriend, and he's a lawyer. And he's like, I wish Mark was here, like, because he is horrible at bargaining. He doesn't ask a single question. The only thing that he does do is say, like, okay, if I do this, do we get out immediately? Because you have to specify. But he doesn't ask a single other question. So he agrees to do this fight, and the fight will be tomorrow night. And she says, make your brother proud. So Lydia is supposed to go out with Pollux that night, but she, like, basically took a tonic so that her period would come early. And because Pollux is a misogynistic, nasty asshole, he doesn't like to be anywhere near her when she's bleeding. You know, what a feminist. And he's like, and he's disgusting because he's like, he knows when her periods are, because he's basically SAing her. Like, Lydia does not want to be having sex with Pollux, but like she has to because this is her cover. But he's not only is he like having sex with her, but he's aggressive and like nasty, possessive about it. Yeah. Like, ugh. So he leaves, like, because they're supposed to go out, and she's like, he's such a handsome, beautiful, like, terrible person. Like, of course he's, like, gorgeous, but, like, evil incarnate. So he leaves, and basically Lydia gets a burner phone every month from Ophian, but they put it in a tampon box, because, of course, he's never going to look in there. So she calls the rebel group, and it's like, something carpet, something, and she's like, oh, I want to check about these floors, or whatever, like, that's their code. And so she's like, hey, it's Agent Daybright, and they're like, she's like, I need aid for a rescue. And they're like, oh, like, basically we are shut down. We lost so many supporters, like when Cormac blew everything up or whatever, and Command is in hiding. And she's like, let me speak to them. And so they do accept her, like, request. And basically she's like, can you give us, like, whatever, like, agents you have for this plan? So back over in Prithian, Nesta is like still really curious about Bryce, and she's like, oh, like your star is like an 8-pointed star. And she says it's the same symbol that I had in my tattoo when Nesta made her bargain with Cassian and her tattoo appeared down her back, but her tattoo's gone now because she fulfilled her bargain with Cassian. And Bryce is like, oh, that's because we're destined to be BFFs. And they walk by this like skeleton, but they avoid it. But unfortunately what they don't avoid is the Alaskan bullworm. So the worm is back. So the worm attacks them, and what we learn is that I had no idea she was doing this. Bryce has been purposely scratching off her hand scabs the entire time they've been walking, and that's why her hands won't heal, because Azrael's like, why won't you heal? Like, that he knew. So she's been making the worm track them this whole point. So Nesta and Azrael start fighting, and she just runs away. But she doesn't get very far because she hears them like crying or whatever, and she's like, damn, like that's bad. So she goes back, and Nesta's like laid out, like she's like half dead, but it was a trap. So Nesta basically told her, like, you know, she figured she would come back because she saved her from the other trap. And so she's like, you're going to be the bait, basically, because it's your blood that the worm is like tracking. So back over to Therian and the guy. So Therian is pissed at Ethan because he knows, like, if he leaves the Viper Queen, then the River Queen will be after him again. And that's like very quick. So we go back over to Nesta and them. So Nesta basically is like using Bryce as bait, and like the worm appears, and Nesta tries to fight the worm, but this worm like eats her power, and so she has to put the mask on, and Azrael's like, do not put your mask on, but she does it, and she is able to kill the worm. And then Azrael has to like get her to take the mask off. He's like, think about Cassian, think about Feyre and Elaine, think about Nyx, and like that finally gets her to do it. And this is a big issue for a lot of people because Feyre literally killed this worm as a human. And they're like, okay, like, is this some like giant daddy worm? And that was a baby worm. But they're like, it took all three of them to kill this worm with powers, but like Feyre was able to just stab it with some bones. I don't know. It's a big issue for like the mass world.
I didn't even think of that.
I didn't really either, but then they pointed out, I'm like, that is true. So I'm like, maybe this is like some prehistoric worm down here, and that was like a different worm. But
or maybe it's just been simmering in the caves.
Yeah, like munching on whatever came down there, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, so that happened. So as they start walking, Bryce apologizes to them, and she's like, that was kind of crappy. And Nesta mentions that she's also seen that 8-pointed star somewhere else, and she says no place good. And Nesta says that Rhys knew that you would go through like the cave, and he was actually pretty proud of her when she winnowed. And Azrael is the one who actually caused the cave in, like not Bryce pushing her, like doing her star power, because they were trying to push her this direction just to like see what she found. So back with the Asteri prison, Ruhn is in his little like mind bridge, and he does talk to Lydia, and this is the first time he's talked to her since his capture, and he informs her that Bryce is not in hell, and Lydia is like positive that Bryce is alive because Rigelus is looking for her, and like obviously they wouldn't be looking for her if she was dead. And Ruhn, like they talk briefly, and Ruhn like ends their like conversation by telling Lydia that like he's only talking to her out of necessity and that she is dead to him. Back in Prithian, Bryce, Ness, and Azrael are still walking, and they reach this like narrow chasm. And so like this is also weird. So it's too small for Azrael to fly across, but Azrael can winnow, and he does it. So they had to like get across it, and they're like, why didn't he winnow? I don't know, something else that's weird. So anyways, so Bryce is like, look, I can get us across, but you gotta charge me up. And Azrael's like, they're scared too because they're afraid that Bryce is gonna like teleport out of here. But he does it, and he does charge her up. And so Bryce is able to winnow them across. But I'm like, why didn't Azrael winnow them?
That's weird.
Why didn't Azrael do it? Like, he can winnow. So, I don't know. I don't know. It could be a goof. I don't know. So, before she does it, Nesta actually shows Bryce that she has her phone, and she's like, this is your collateral, like, don't leave, basically. Like, girl, I will get another phone when I get home. I don't have to keep this phone, but whatever. And Nesta doesn't know that, obviously. So they get across, and then Bryce is starting to see, like, all these new carvings, and they depict the cauldron and Ramiel, which Nesta and Azrael explain, like, what the cauldron is and how it's the creator of their world. And Nesta says, like, that's how I was turned into Fae. I went in the cauldron. And she tells her how she's made, and she's high Fae, and about the Dread Trove, and all this stuff. So Bryce wonders if Luna's horn, which was brought to Midgard by her ancestors, was also made by the cauldron. And Bryce explains, like, we don't have a cauldron in my world. We just have, like, gods that we look up to or whatever. And she asks, like, what happens to them when they die. And Azrael kind of explains, like, starfall. And so Bryce tells them, like, what happens to them when they die. But she's like, that won't happen to me because I bargained my soul. This book is really, that's something else that people complained about. Because they're like, it was so much, like, repetitive stuff. Like, it's almost like you could have jumped into this book, even though you can't really jump into this book. But it was like, some people were like, we know all of this stuff. Like, there was so much, like, recap in it. So that was kind of weird. I don't know. So Nesta gives Bryce her phone back, and she tells them about, like, Hunt and her mate, like, being her mate. And Nesta's like, how does this phone work? And she's like, honestly, I don't know how. I don't know. I don't know either. Like, if somebody asks me how my phone, like, it just works. Technology. I don't know. And she's like, I don't know. I have thousands of songs. And Nesta's like, you have thousands of songs? Like, you recorded each individual song? And she's like, no. Like, there's Apple Music, basically. Like, basically, like, she's like, I don't know how that worked either. Like, she's just trying to explain it to her. And so we jump back over to Therian real fast. And Therian knows that Ari is going to be the one that has to fight Ethan. And he's like, please don't kill him or whatever. And Ari goes, do you like your wolf cooked with barbecue sauce or gravy? Gross. And back over with Bryce, so they are still walking and they approach a wall that's engraved with an 8-pointed star, and it opens with Bryce's magic. So they get inside, and it's like the door like teleports them because it slams behind them, and they instantly end up in the prison. And Nesta says that this is where she had seen the 8-pointed star. Back over with Ethan, he is going to have to fight Sigrid because Ari left. She was never like the Viper Queen's slave, but the Viper Queen's like, well, she got a better offer, which really like probably wasn't a good offer, but she was like trying to do the right thing because Therian, and like the Viper Queen makes Therian feel bad basically because she's basically like, yeah, she probably went to a crappy place, but like it's your fault. So Ethan's gonna have to fight Sigrid now. Back with Bryce, they reach a like arena-sized cavern, and there's a star in the force center, and Nesta says like that's where she found the harp. And she tells him like the harp was able to like move you through time and space, and it also like stop time. And Nesta's like, you know, this seems really weird. You guys should stand back. And she tricks Azrael and is like, oh my God, what's that? Like the oldest trick in the book. And Azrael turns around and she like crosses into this room, but it has like wards up so Azrael can't get in. So when she gets in this little like space, Bryce discovers that the carvings on the floor depict the constellations of Midgard, and she believes that the harp was left there for someone like her to find. So Bryce thinks that the Asteri made these weapons, and she thinks the harp was hidden from them and left for her. So she steps on the star. Back over with Hunt and the guys, Hunt is trying to get Ruhn to swing towards like this wall of weapons, but he can't reach it. So Ruhn asks Hunt to bite off his hand so that he can have a little more slack and swing to the wall and use his feet to like grab a weapon and then like ab curl it. Oh my gosh. But so Baxian's like, you know, I owe you a solid. I'll do it. Dear God. So back with Lydia, she's like back in her room or whatever, and Pollux comes back and he's like, oh, good news. The harpy was saved. And Lydia's like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Because obviously if the harpy wakes up, then she's going to tell them that Lydia is the one that killed them. We go back to Bryce, and so when she steps on the star, a hologram, don't know how that works, of the High Fae appears, and it is the one known as Selene. So Selene is the daughter of Rhys's distant ancestor, Thea. Selene's hologram basically starts telling them this whole story about thousands of years ago, the Daglan or the Asteri were in Prythian, and they enslaved the High Fae for 5,000 years. And every year, the High Fae had to pay a tithe to them. So this, like, they had to give them their power, but they, you know, it was called a tithe. And they basically gave over pieces of their power to strengthen the Daglan and limit themselves. And then one day, Thea was, like, basically able to trick her mistress and overpower them. And Azrael just thinks, like, Selene looks like Rhys's sister. Like, that's crazy. So back with Pollux and Lydia, Pollux tells her that Rigulus just needs one more thing, but then the harpy will wake up. And he is like in the shower, and he asks Lydia to get in the shower with him, and she's like, what about my period? And he's like, oh, the shower washing away. I hate you so much. I hate you. So anyways, back to Bryce. The hologram tells Bryce a story of Selene's parents. So her parents were Thea and Finn, and they were the first High King and Queen. So after they overthrew the Daglan and got rid of them, they became High King and Queen. And Thea basically, like when she was serving the Daglan, she learned about like their deadly instruments, which is the Dread Trove. So there was 4 of them: the Maas, the crown, the harp, and the horn. So Thea slowly stole like those objects away and hid them with Finn. And the last one that they had to get was the cauldron. And that's, you know, we know what the cauldron is. But they can't destroy the cauldron. So Finn pulled the Star Sword from the cauldron, and then he and Thea used the Daglan's own weapons to defeat them, basically. And afterwards, Thea and Finn made a new court known as the Dusk Court, which again, that's the door that Bryce went through. So the Dusk Court. And Thea and Finn had 2 daughters, Selene and Helena. And as Finn got older, he wanted Helena to inherit the throne. But Thea, like, basically got power hungry. So her and her general, Peleus, decided to overthrow Finn. So they took him out to this area, which we know is known as the Mill, which is where Nesta found the mask. So they took Finn out to the middle, and they basically had a Kelpie drown him in the bog. And then Thea claimed the Star Sword and Truth Teller. And so she has basically the whole Dread Trove now. So Thea became an all-powerful queen, but she was like still like she wanted more. So Peleus convinces her, because he's been secretly allied with the Asteri, not realizing that they are the Daglan under the rule of Rigulus, that they should conquer a new world. So Thea opens a portal to Midgard using the horn and the harp, and her people cross over, and they realize that Midgard was actually already occupied with other would-be conquerors that came from other worlds. And they basically enslaved the humans there, because there were humans on Midgard. Basically, the Asteri pretended that they were just regular Fae who had also overthrown the Daglan. But after they were there for a while, Thea got like paranoid, and she hid the harp and the horn in like a like middle space or whatever that only she could access. And Bryce is basically like super pissed, because like she's like, okay, so you're trash too, so my ancestors are trash just like all the other Fae. And then she's like, what's up with Adis, because Adis loves Thea, and like she's a terrible person because she's a conqueror. So we go back to Ethan, and he starts his fight with Sigrid, and Sigrid is not holding back. Like she is like, she'll kill him, like whatever. And Therian is like, okay, like, because one of them gets knocked out, and Therian's like, okay, you can stop the fight now. And the Viper Queen's like, no, I'm not stopping. She's like, no, I'm not stopping until someone's dead. And he knows, like, okay, Ethan will not kill Sigrid. Like, he knows that he's not going to do that. And he's like, damn it, like, this is all my fault. And so Ethan, like, does get the upper hand, and he stabs Sigrid in the stomach. Back over to Bryce. The hologram switches, and now Thea's people are waging war on Midgard with the other kinds of Vanir, including, like, shapeshifters. And Selene and Helena basically were sent by Thea to inspect the internal city, so where the Asteri are, and that's where they learned that Rigulus and them were not Fae, but they were actually the Daglan. And so Thea decided to use the harp and the horn to open a portal to a world known to have defeated the Daglan before, which was Hell. And that's how Thea and Adis even, like, connected, basically. And so Thea stops trusting Peleus, and we switch back over to the prison. So, or the Asteri dungeons, not the prison. There's so many prisons. So Baxian is chomping off Bryce. Baxian is chomping off Ruhn's hand. Just and Ruhn gets free. He swings across the room, and Rigulus and Pollux are like, oh, good job. Like, good job doing that. So that was all for nothing. But we jump back over to the Viper Queen, and so basically, so Ethan is still fighting Sigrid, and basically what happens is he goes to like jab her in the shoulder, but she's like not a skilled fighter, so she bobs when she should have weaved, and he stabs her through the neck. Yeah. Okay. So back in Prythian, the hologram is still giving us a history lesson, and we learn that one of the princes of Hell, Adis, is the one who answered Thea's call. And he basically like wanted to help. So Thea learned, she then goes to the humans of Parthos, which so that's supposed to be true. And she learns that the Daglan have been poisoning the Midgard's water. So the reason that they have to do the drop in Midgard is because they have some kind of parasite in the water. And, like, that's the only way they're able to access even a bit of their power. And so even after the drop, that's not their full power. But this parasite has made it so, like, they can never, like, have their full power. And basically, like, if a Vanir refused to do the drop, then the parasites would basically suck the immortality from the Vanir's veins, and it forces you to age like a human. And so Thea's whole plan had been for them to go live in Hell, actually. But what ended up happening is that, you know, Adis and Thea raised an army, but they were overpowered by the Daglan. And that's because, you know, Peleus was sneaky and undercover. So during the final battle, Thea plays the harp, and an 8-pointed star appeared on her chest, allowing her to give her magic to her daughters. So she split it between the two of them. And Thea then gave Helena the horn and Selene the harp and Truth Teller, and told them to open a portal and leave. So they are running for the portal, and that is what became known as the Northern Rift. But as Selene was getting ready to go back to the Dust Court with the harp and Truth Teller, Helena stayed behind with the horn to help defend the people. And this is the battle in which Peleus beheaded Thea with the Star Sword. I cannot say that today. With the Star Sword. I said it again. With the Star Sword. Why do I want there to be a W? I know there is a W, but like, why do I want to say sword? It's not sword. So anyway, so Celine gets through the portal and she closes the portal. But if you remember in Silver Flames, if you read it, when Nesta went to the prison, she was like, I can hear people crying like they're trapped in the stone. That's what she was hearing. Because as Celine was closing the portal, people were begging, like, please take us back with you. Please, please, please. But she didn't do that. She just closed it on them. So Bryce is even more pissed now. So basically, when Celine went back, she, like, was ashamed. So she decided that she was going to try to atone for her mother's sins. So she spends decades hunting down the rest of the Daglin's monsters, and she traps them in the death court, which is what eventually she turned into the prison. And eventually she does go back to Prythian, and she marries the High Lord of Night. And she has a son that was born of powers of shadow, mist, and starlight. And this is not Rhys, but this is one of Rhys's, like, grandfathers or whatever. And she basically erased the Dust Court's history out of that world. She told, like, lies about herself and her sister and her mom, and, like, it hurt her to do it, but, like, basically Thea and Helena and all of them were, even her, like, she changed her name, like, they were a myth, basically. They weren't supposed to be real. And what we also learn is that the shifters that are in Midgard, so like Ethan and the wolf shifters, originally were Fae. And I cannot spoil this, but I can't wait till it all comes full circle, Hercule. Yeah. So originally the shifters were Fae who could just shift into animals. They weren't just animal shifters. And Bryce is just pissed. She's like, you guys were cowards. Like, that was just such a cowardly thing to do. And then Celine says, basically, she had a son. She never told her husband about, like, what was down here under the court, like, what was the death court. But she did bring her son. She told him everything. And she told him not to tell his dad, but to make sure that his son and the next son always knew so that it was not lost. Which we know isn't true because Rhys doesn't know anything about it. So it's somewhere around there this fell apart. But yeah, so that's basically what happened. So we go back to the Asteri dungeons, and Rigelus tells Hunt that it hurts him to see him like this with his halo again. And Hunt says, halo, or do you mean black crown? And Rigelus looks surprised, and he's like, have you been talking to shadows? And Rigelus says, like, can I get some of your lightning, bro? And he's like, you can give me some lightning, or I'm going to kill your friends. So he, like, takes a portion of Hunt's lightning, and he never says what it's for. But then he's like, okay, you guys can basically kill one of them anyways. And so they can kill either Ruhn or Baxian in the next couple of days. So in the meantime, Lydia has been given permission to inject a healing potion into Hunt and Baxian. So she says, hey, let's regrow their wings and then cut them off again. But really, she wants them to regrow their wings so that they can hopefully fly by the time she breaks them out of here. She basically, like, kicks Pollux and the Hawk out of the, like, dungeons or whatever, and she releases the guys off the, like, hanging thing or whatever, and she tells Ruhn about the harpy and, like, the escape plan, even though, like, he said that she was dead to him. So we go back over to Prythian, and, like, Bryce is still pissed off, and Azriel and Nesta learn about the horn, and basically Bryce tells them, like, I have the horn in my bag, which Nesta had it figured out. She's like, she is the horn, like, she put it together too. And so they start freaking out, though, because they're like, oh, so, like, you can open a portal at any time. Like, are you going to leave the Asteri back here? And so Azrael's like, I got to go get backup. So he starts to leave, and Bryce is like, I can't let you go. So she throws power at him and basically starts, like, caving in this whole, like, area. And she realizes, because Celine said that she left her power here, so she already has Helena's power because she's a descendant. But then she touches the ground where the star is, and she absorbs Celine's power. And so she draws up all this power, and she basically, like, collapses this entire prison. Like, the floor crumbles from underneath her. So back with Lydia and the guys, Lydia is getting ready to execute, like, her whole plan, basically. So she goes to the hag again, and she gets Erithus. And she tells Erithus about Lahaba. And she's like, you have people out there, like, basically, like, you have a reason to live. So she gets Erithus, and she takes her to the hag, and she basically, like, tells the hag, like, I'll free you she tells the hag, like, she'll free the hag if she removes the slave tattoo from Erithus. And the hag's like, well, how do I know you're not going to do anything to me? And she's like, oh, I'm not going to kill you. Like, I'm not going to do anything to you. And so the hag removes the slave mark from Erithus, and as soon as she does, Erithus literally like burns the hag to like ashes. And I'm like, well, Lydia didn't lie, like she didn't kill you. And Erithus agrees to like trust Lydia. And so Lydia tells her like about the plan to free the guys, and she tells her like, I need you to burn me to make it like look good about you escaping. And then we go back over to Bryce, and she collapsed the floor from underneath her, and she lands in this chamber that has a crystal sarcophagus with a female inside of it. So there's a dark-haired female in this sarcophagus with like bright, what'd she say? She said these are blowjob lips, like the bright red lipstick. And she thinks she's like passed out or whatever, like comatose, like Sleeping Beauty basically, but she's not. Like she can realize that she's breathing. And then the lady opens her eyes and she says, "Release me, slave." And Azrael is like, what is going on? He's like, we didn't even know this was down here. Like, a slave? Like, what are you talking about? And she calls Azrael a foot soldier and says, like, I'm your god, like, free me. And she's, like, scratching, like, the glass or whatever. And she's like, you need to come do your tithe, basically. And she can, like, smell them, which gives me such Jeepers Creepers vibe.
Ooh.
Yes, because she's like smelling like through the like coffin basically, like and she knows that Bryce has the horn. So we switch back over to Ethan, and Ethan like basically, so he stabbed Sigrid through the throat. So he was like, oh dear God. So when he took his like claws out, like her head came off. He decapitated her. He's the shame, like, and so Flynn and them are like, oh buddy, it's okay. Oh God. So the Viper Queen's like, all right, well, like, you can go now, like, whatever. So they get in the van, and, like, as they're getting in the van, the fire sprites come, and they're like, go, go, go. They literally burnt down the meat market. So we go back over to Bryce, and she realizes that this lady is Thea's mistress, the Daglin that she had enslaved. And so instead of killing her, she basically, like, because Thea was, like, such a power-hungry person, she, like, kept her down here as punishment, knowing that, like, she was torturing her, basically. So the, like, Daglin is like, did Finn send you? And she's like, well, Finn sent them, but Thea sent me or whatever. And she agrees to answer Bryce's questions if Bryce frees her from her coffin. And Bryce, you moron. She's like, okay, and just opens it. I could literally punch her absolute lights out. What about her seemed like a good idea?
Right.
I would never do that. So the woman gets out, and we learn that her name is Vespris, and she is an Asteri. She's the evening star. And basically she says that the reason they even came to this world and like all the other worlds is because they use all their resources on their world, and so they had to find a new home, basically. And she says that, like, basically all the worlds that they conquer, they basically put a kill switch in place. For example, in Prythian, you can't get rid of the cauldron. So in Akawar, when the cauldron was, like, breaking apart, it was, like, creating a black hole and, like, sucking them up. Like, if the cauldron is destroyed, then the world will collapse on itself. And she tells them, like, I'm not going to help you kill my own kind. Like, I know you want to know how to kill Rigellus, basically. She says that she basically is like, you know, is it so much that we ask for, like, this little drop of your power? Like, was your life so terrible? And Bryce is like, you know, my life really wasn't terrible, but, like, that's probably because, like, I'm half A, but, like, it was terrible for other people. And Bryce is like, you know, like, all of you can basically die. Like, we're not doing that. And she says, like, the reason that they got the parasite is because, like, the tithe was optional, basically. Like, you could, like, choose not to do the tithe, I guess. But, like, the parasite, they don't have any choice about. And Vespers reveals that Prythian has a first light core, which is basically hidden in the misty places where the veil between the world is the thinnest, like the prison, because it's shrouded in mist. And Bryce is like, okay, I wonder if we have places like that on Midgard, and she thinks about the Bone Quarter and the Northern Rift. Like, those are both really misty places. And so Vespers tries to, like, summon some first light from beneath her. Nesta, like, plunges Ataraxia through her chest. So we go back with our guys and like Ethan and them, and Ethan is like basically he's just sulking and he feels terrible. But back to Bryce. So Nesta stabs Ataraxia through Vespris, but it doesn't kill her. And Azrael is like, do not summon the trove. Like, she wants the trove, do not summon it. So Bryce summons Truth Teller and the Star Sword to her. And I'm pretty sure I just said it again, but it's okay. I'm over it. Whatever. And so basically she charges like the swords up and she plunges both of them into Vespris. And, but Vespris is like fighting with Azrael and she's able to absorb some of Azrael's power. But the blow does weaken her enough that Nesta comes in from behind her with Ataraxia again. And this time she, like lights it with her flame and she basically like stabs it through her neck or whatever. Back in Lunathian, like everybody is like trying to get to the depth charger. And so they get all the way there. And Ethan is like, you guys go ahead. I gotta go back and make this right. You cut off her head, dude. I don't know what you could do to make that right. So going back to Bryce, she's pissed because she's like, why would you kill her? We could have got answers. And I'm like, no, Bryce, you wouldn't have gotten any more answers out of her. You couldn't control her. Like, she's like, we could have just got her under control. Okay, she was under control in the sarcophagus. Right. That's when you should have been asking your questions.
Right.
Once she's out, she's out. You idiot. So anyways, so now Bryce is like, okay, well, I'm not going back with you guys. She doesn't want to be interrogated by the Night Court. So Bryce decides she's going to open a portal to Midgard, and she leaves, and she takes Star Sword and Truth Teller with her. So we go to part 2, which is known as The Search. And we open up with Hunt and Baxian and the guys in the dungeon. And Hunt and Baxian's wings are regrowing. And Adis is back talking to Hunt. And Hunt's like, how do I know you're not Rigellus? Because he's pulled this before. And he's like, I met Bryce on her 13th birthday, blah, 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 blah. And Hunt asks, like, why does Rigellus want my power? And Adis is like, do not give him your power. And he's like, well, a little too late. Like, he took it or whatever. And basically Adis says, like, Rigellus wants to resurrect the dead. That's the same reason they wanted Sophie. But then the Hammer and the Hawk come in, and they have decided that they're going to kill Ruhn because he means the most to Bryce. Which I don't know about that. Technically her mate would mean the most, but whatever. So, Bryce comes back to Midgard, and she lands right in her father's office. And he was, like, waiting on her. Like, I don't know if he felt her coming or what, but he literally slaps on these Gorsian shackles as soon as she gets in there, and he takes the sword and the dagger from her. So he immediately starts interrogating her, like, where you been, what'd you do, what'd you see? And he's like, I need this for my personal research. And he's like, I want you to take me where you just came from. And he's like, I'm going to keep you hostage here, basically. So Ethan runs back from the shore or wherever, the dock, and he decides he's going to go to the House of Flame and Shadow. And no one ever goes there. So good luck, Ethan. So back with Bryce, the Autumn King basically tells her, like, for the past 5 days, like, it's been 5 days since Bryce left. Ophian has basically, like, lost a whole bunch of members. Ruhn and Hunt are still alive. And Bryce tells him, like, about Prithian, like, just generic stuff, like, about the homeworld. And she's like, to do, like, a little dig at him, she's like, oh, the Fae are so much stronger there because they don't have to do tithing or, like, the drop or whatever. And she tells him that, he's like, how did you get this dagger? She's like, I stole it. And she's, like, asking about Ruhn, and her dad's like, Ruhn deserves his fate. And he tells her that Cormac is dead. And she has no way to communicate. Like, he takes her phone. Like, she doesn't have her phone. He turned off all of the, like, internet and Wi-Fi and stuff in his house. So there's no way to communicate out. So we go over to Ethan. And he's in the House of Flame and Shadow. And he immediately runs into Jessica Roga. And he's like, I need a necromancer. Like, I want to resurrect a lost Fendir heir. And Jessica's like, and I want an assistant. So, yeah, so she needs an assistant. So the Autumn King and Bryce are still chit-chatting. And basically the Autumn King has been looking for, like, the origin of the Fae because it seems like they're getting weaker every generation. And that the future of their survival, like, relies on this because basically he's like, we can't, like, be, like, less powerful than the angels because then the Asteri won't care about us. And the Autumn King has also been studying Ruhn's starlight power. He, like, has some of it in a prism. He's been trying to find a way to concentrate it into a weapon that can be used against the Asteri. So Bryce tells her dad, like, everything that she's learned about the Asteri, and he suspects, again, that, like, the Fae are weakening, but it's because the Asteri are devouring too much of their power. And we learn that the Asteri cannot go to Avalon, and they can't penetrate the mist around it. And Bryce asks him, like, do you know what a thin place is? And he's like, no, why? And she's like, oh, no reason. And he's like, okay, there's definitely a reason, but okay. And he starts talking about her mom, and he's like, Ember loved me once. And Bryce is like, I mean, yeah, until you hit her, like, whatever. And basically she asked him, like, she's like, you want me to take down the Asteri? He's like, I never said that. But she's like, that's what you want. Like, that's why you're asking me this stuff. So back in the Asteri dungeons, the Hawk takes Ruhn, Hunt, and Baxian from the dungeons, and he's going to take them to Rigelus. But they are met at the elevator by Lydia. So Lydia gets on with them, and she, like, is still looking like she's weak because she's recovering from the burn. But as the elevator starts, she shoots the Hawk because she's initiating this go plan. So Baxian is like, what the fuck? Like, he's like, what is going on? Because he has no idea, because Hunt's like, oh yeah, by the way, forgot to tell you. He has no idea. Ruhn is missing a hand because she's like, what? Can you imagine the man you love getting on the elevator and he's handless? Thank God their body parts grow back into this, though. So Lydia takes off their shackles and she carries Ruhn to the getaway car, and she just starts driving out of the city, and they are getting chased by, like, the Dreadwolves and Mordok. So there are also rebels, like, stationed throughout the city, like, that are setting off explosives at different points. And, like, Ruhn starts crying because he can hear, like, he hears Flynn and Deck, like, he hears the people coming over. He's like, oh my God, they came and got me. Like, I can't believe, like, they came and got me. So they make out the city, but unfortunately so does Mordok and the Dreadwolves. So they are hot on their trail. So Bryce is just, like, wandering around her dad's house and, like, going through her brother's room and, like, just chilling because she can't go anywhere. So back with Lydia, she gets them all the way to the coast, and she's like, get into the boat, basically. And so she has Hunt and Baxian, who they are able to fly. So they grab Ruhn and they are, like, flying him, and they're like, come on. And she's like, no, I'm going to be, like, the distraction. So she shifts into her deer form, and she just, like, nuzzles Ruhn, and she runs off because she knows that, like, Mordok will chase her. So Therian meets, like, Hunt and them at the depth charger, and Ruhn's like, please go help her. Like, please go help her. But it's, like, it's kind of too late. So basically they chase her all the way to, like, the edge of this cliff. So she shifts back into human form, and she just jumps. But it's so high. Like, if her body hits the water, it's going to, like, die. But she also gets shot in the chest by one of the Dreadwolves as she makes the jump. So, back over to Jessica and Ethan. So, Jessica has agreed to help Ethan find a necromancer as long as he will be her assistant. And he's like, you know, I messed up, and Sigrid was supposed to make the wolves better. And Jessica says, like, you know, well, I need you to work for me for a couple of days before I just do that. So, I'm going to keep her body on ice so you can prove yourself. Over to Bryce, the Autumn King is telling her that Ruhn and Hunt have escaped from the dungeons. And she can tell that, like, he's jealous of Randall because he still likes Ember, and also because, like, Bryce obviously, like, treats Randall like that's her dad. Like, he's not her dad, Randall is. And he, like, basically is like, you know, I know your parents have a new son. Like, I hate to have to do something to him if you don't take me to Prithian, basically. Because he wants to be a conqueror. Like, it's not enough that he's the king here. He wants to conquer, like, other worlds. And so he says, like, from his research, he's learned about, like, Truth Teller and the Star Sword, and they can open a portal to nowhere if they're combined and basically make a black hole. And so Bryce wonders if, like, there's more answers in the original resting place of the Star Sword, which is on the Fey Island of Avalon, which is where Ruhn got it. And basically, like, Autumn King's like, well, females aren't allowed to go into the Cave of Princes, and they're also not allowed to use the Avalon archives because they're very misogynistic over there, too. And you also can't even get on Avalon without an invitation. So on the depth charger, Ruhn is, like, refusing to leave Lydia's bedside. It's like, she's still unconscious. She died. They had to revive her, and then Hunt also had to help and use his lightning because the medicine was not bringing her back fast enough. So Ruhn still feels, like, super guilty, and Flynn is like, you know, like, just go take a nap. Like, I will be here. You don't have to stay here. And the Ocean Queen comes to the depth charger because she wants to talk to Therian, because her sister, the River Queen, and the Viper Queen are both out to get him now, and now they want to launch a war on the Ocean Queen for hiding him and sheltering him, basically. Because he just brings trouble wherever he goes.
Wherever he goes.
Like, seriously. Meanwhile, the fire sprites are like tucked away in a windowless room because obviously they're under thousands of meters of water and they don't want to get washed out. So poor little fire sprites. But Hunt goes to check on Baxian and he is like working out, but he doesn't really talk, but he knows like Baxian will talk when he like gets ready or whatever. But he did tell Baxian everything as they were getting healed up, and like Baxian truly had no idea that Lydia was a double agent. So back with Jessica and Ethan, Ethan learns about like Jessica's book collection and learns that it's from the Library of Parthos, which really was a library. It was a human library guarded by the priestesses, and it predates the Asteri by 2,000 years. And he's like, why don't you just like sell them to somebody? And she's like, because my spells are in there too. And we learned that like one of the only one human ship was able to escape like the Asteri's destruction of Parthos, which was the Griffin, which is Griffin Antiquities. Like, it makes so much sense. So the Griffin sailed to Valbara with the help of the Ocean Queen and Mare. So actually, like, you know, the Ocean Queen's been around for a minute. Like, she's old. So Ethan asks, like, how do you know all this stuff about it? And Jessica finally gives us some information. Jessica is an immortal, basically, like a true one. So she makes herself look older, but she is cursed to be, like, eternally youthful. And we learn that Jessica was a human priestess at Parthos, but when she got away with the books, she was cursed by Prince Apollyon to be forever unchanged and immortal because he believed that the book has like some power that she's not. He's like, what is their power? And she's like, they don't have a power, like knowledge. I don't know like what to tell you. And he's like, that's not true. So he cursed her basically, and she has been this way for 15,000 years.
I was not expecting that.
I
was like, whoa.
I do not want to live for 15,000 years.
No.
That is such a long time. I couldn't even imagine like 1,000 years. No, I didn't know what she was, but yeah.
I couldn't even imagine like 200 years, 150 years.
Like what? That's crazy. So basically, like, Ethan's like, okay, so how did you get powers then? Like, you were a human. And so what happened is when Apollyon did curse her, he had just consumed Rigulus because he ate one of the, not Rigulus, Sirius. He had just consumed Sirius and he ate one of the Asteri. So he was just, like, full of power. And so when he cursed her, he touched her and he, like, gave her some power. So Jessica has been a priestess, a witch, and now she's a sorceress. And he's like, so do you want to start aging? And she's like, not until the world emerges where the books will be safe. So back with Bryce, she tells her dad, like, basically how, like, Randall's always been the best dad for her and how, like, he, like, fell in love with her mom in 3 days and, like, that pisses the Autumn King off. But she's doing this as a distraction because she restrains the Autumn King with the same shackles he put on her. So basically, when she was wandering around the house, she went into Ruhn's room, and she remembers him telling him, because his dad used to torture him and burn him, similarly to Azrael, that he had a key for the shackles. And so she reveals to him, like, I came here on purpose. She's like, you think that I'm just so dumb that I just accidentally landed in your office? No, I came here so that you would reveal your research about the sword. And so she's like, isn't it terrible that you sent all your servants away and turned off your technology? Because now I'm going to lock you in this closet with this water bucket and no one's going to hear you screaming until someone gets interested to come and check on you. So she locks him in the closet and then she sees like his little like crystals and stuff and she's able to like power herself up so she can teleport to her mans. And before she does, she tells him like, you know, I would like to kill you for my mom and for Ruhn. And he says, I'll kill you and your bitch mother for this. And she says, I'll pencil you in for tomorrow.
I love her, like, just sassiness. It's honestly, I feel like what really makes
it does. Like, book. I love Bryce. Like, she is definitely, you'll like the sass, I think, in Thorn of Glass too. And so he also tells her like, well, I have wards up, and she's like, not against teleporting because you didn't know I could do that. So she's out of there. So we go back over to the depth charger and Lydia has been like in the bed, but she wakes up and she asks Ruhn because he's sitting there and she's like, am I dead or alive? And he says alive. So she rips out all of her IVs and she sprints through this boat and she runs to the school area and she runs and finds these 2 boys in a classroom. One is golden haired, one is dark haired. They're 15 and she's like staring at them. And so like Flynn and everybody's like, what is going on? And they're like, oh, do you have brothers on the ship? She said, no. They're my sons.
Wasn't expecting that.
Was not expecting that.
Nope.
So we learned that she has 2 twin boys. They are Bran and Actaeon, or Ace. And she tries to talk to them because she also has never met her children. Well, okay, she did meet them when they were born, but she has not seen them in like the 15 years, essentially, like almost their entire life. I think they were like 18 months or something, so like 14 years, whatever. And like the teacher's like, I get it, but like this isn't gonna be good for them. Like we need to wait till their adoptive dads are here. Like they have 2 dads, and she's like, then we can meet at the end of the day. So she's like, okay. So she like leaves, and she immediately passes out. She faints. So Therian, Hunt, and Baxian are going to meet with the Ocean Queen. And that's when we learn that, like, the Ocean Queen's pissed because she's like, Therian, like, there is a, like, 5 million gold marked, I think, is, like, what they, or I think it's 3 million if he's dead, 5 million if he's alive, because the River Queen wants to kill him. But as they're having this meeting, Bryce just teleports right on in. So Bryce introduces herself as the Queen of the Valbaran Fae. And she says, I'm taking responsibility for Therian. And she basically says, like, the Ocean Queen's like, and who are you? I'm the owner of this house. And she's like, basically she tells them stuff about the Asteri, and she's like, the Asteri have poisoned the Midgard's water with parasites. And the Ocean Queen is like, she didn't know this, but she's not surprised because she was wondering why her people had to make the drop, even though they're under, like, and Bryce says, like, can you guys take us to Avalon? And so the Ocean Queen's like, yeah, I guess. But really, like, she doesn't want to. Like, she's like, okay, like, you went out of this world, like, let's just go find a new world and, like, move. And we learned that the Ocean Queen has been around even before the Asteri. So she's old too. But she's like, let's just go to this new world. And she's like, I want to be first in line. And she's like, just because your people are old doesn't mean that you're first in line to, like, the new world or whatever. But she's like, okay, we'll take you to Avalon. So Bryce, like, reunites with her friends. She's talking, and then, like, Ruhn busts in because he wasn't in there. And so, like, they have, like, an emotional meet. And Bryce, like, shows them, she basically snagged the Autumn King's research notebook, and she plans to use it as a bargaining chip to get to Avalon because, again, you have to be invited. But she knows that King Morven is, like, going to want that because he's nosy. So they do that, and then her and Hunt, like, get a little alone time, but she immediately just starts crying and is like, are you okay? Which this is, a lot of people don't like this, like, reunion. Like, they feel like it wasn't heartfelt. Like, it wasn't enough. Like, it wasn't like, oh my God, I thought we were never going to see each other again. Mm-hmm. And now, like, we're back. But, she cries into him. They, like, get together. And Hunt basically starts telling her, like, I regret, like, everything. Like, we never should have done this. And she's like, what? She's like, absolutely not. Like, I don't regret anything. Like, he's like, I thought I was going to die down there in those dungeons. She's like, I thought I was never going to get home. So she's kind of, like, pissed at him. And, that's kind of where we leave that. So Lydia does get to meet her boys, and she sits down with Bran and Ace, and then their dads are David and Renki, I believe. And basically, like, the boys had no idea who their mom was. They know that she's the Hind because they can watch TV, but they didn't know that, like, she was their mom. And, like, Bran's, like, kind of, like, he's cool with her or whatever, but Ace immediately hates her and thinks she's a terrible person. She's like, you're not our mom. And like, she's like taking it like to the chest basically, and she's like, you guys are just like when you were babies. And Ace hates her because he's like, the Hind's a terrible person, and like, why do you do all that stuff, and like, you're dating Pollux, like, you're just a horrible person. And so like, the dads are like, chill out, like, I'm so sorry, like, chill out. So she leaves, and like, one of the dads follows her out and is like, we did not raise them like that. We didn't even know who their mom was until now, but like, we did not like raise them to be like that, and like, we want you to bond with them. We're so happy you're here. Like, they're really, really welcoming. And we learned, like, Ace is, like, a brainiac. Like, even when he was a baby, he would, like, take stuff apart and put it back together. But, like, they're also deer shifters, and so it's kind of weird because they're under the water. But, like, Ace even, like, developed something so that they can, like, swim with the mare kids and all kinds of stuff. And Bran is just, like, he's just a jock. They're like, he's just a jock. He's all right. And so a messenger comes to Lydia and is like, you need to meet with the Ocean Queen. And she's pissed because she's like, why would you like ruin your double agent, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, well, now since you can't do that, I want you to go with Bryce's group to Avalon, basically. So Ruhn is like in his room. He's like pissed off. He doesn't know what to do. So he's like, I'm going to go work out. But he runs into Lydia as he's like leaving his room. And so he wants to know like about her sons, but he obviously doesn't want to pry. And we learned that like Lydia hates the Ocean Queen. So basically Lydia got pregnant. She was on the boat. She had her kids. 18 months after she had them, she was forced to start working for the Ocean Queen, and basically is not allowed to see her kids. But she snaps at him because she's like, I thought you didn't want to hear my sob story. And he's like, I'm still processing. Like, anybody would be, like, stressed out. Like, anybody would be stressed out if they found out who you were and, like, you have kids and, like, yada, yada, blah, 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 blah. Whatever, Ruhn. So, over with Ethan, the astronomer finds Ethan and is like, oh, I'm going to kill you. You stole from me. You stole my mystic, basically. But back on the boat, Ruhn and Bryce inform, like, everyone about their plan to go to Avalon. Ruhn is telling them about the murder twins, and that is basically, like, their cousins. So, Cormac and the murder twins were in the ordeal when Ruhn, Flynn, and Declan all went down there, and Ruhn got the Star Sword and all of that. But the murder twins can read minds, and they do it without permission, and they will try, like, to kill them. So Flynn is like, I hate going to Avalon. Like, my magic always gets super weird over there because he has, like, earth magic. Not exactly sure what that means, but it gets really weird over there. And Therian is just, like, feeling sad because he knows, like, his friends are leaving tomorrow and he is not allowed to leave the boat. So he's like, damn, like, I'm going to be trapped here. Like, I got out of one prison and go to another prison. Like, that's just Therian's whole MO. So Bryce and her friends, like, make plans. So Ruhn, Flynn, and Declan, when they get to Avalon, they are going to go to the archives and, like, research because women aren't allowed in there. Like, when Bryce had asked her dad about it, and he's like, females are not allowed in the Fae archives. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry, we'll get our period blood on your books. I freaking, like, I cannot with Bryce.
Yeah.
And he also told her that no females before her and since Thea have had the Star Sword. Like, she's like, not a single one. But they're not allowed in the Cave of Princes. Like, they're not allowed down there. It's like, your prince sucked and he stole it. Like, and it's all a lie. And the patriarchy. Like, that's what it is. Anyways. So, yeah, so Ruhn, Flynn, and Declan are going to go to the archives, and Bryce, Hunt, and Baxian are going to go to their team Caves of Princes. And Lydia's like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I need to come with you guys. And she tells them, like, the Ocean Queen wants me to spy on you, but, like, I'm just coming, basically. So, Lydia brings Bryce to meet the three, like, fire sprites, and, like, they talk about Erithus being free, and she talks about Lahaba, and Lydia says that, they want, like, Erithus ran, like, when they left the Eternal City. So she's like, I want you guys to track her down and convince her to fight against the Asteri. And they don't think, like, that they're going to be any help, because they're like, we're enslaved. But that's when they tell them about Lahaba, and Bryce tells them about Lahaba and, like, the whole Micah thing, and they are, like, so proud, and it's, Lahaba. But Bryce tells Lydia, like, like, if you ever need anyone to talk to, like, you can talk to me. Like, I know you can't talk to Ruhn about everything, so, like, I'm here for you, basically. And then Bryce and Hunt lay in bed that night, and they are just, like, talking about, like, Avala and all that, and I'm like, where's the sexy time? Where's the You thought you were gonna die. You thought you were dead. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk about that. What is going on? Where's the spice? We're too serious right here. We could die at any moment. But anyway, so they're just chatted up. So back with Ethan, the astronomer basically tells him, like, Sigrid was mine, and he wants payment or he wants her returned, which I'm like, yeah, here's her body. Here you go. But instead, Hypaxia comes in and is like, the wolf is no longer yours. So basically, Jessica ends up, like, saving Ethan. So, like, the astronomer never, like, legally had Sigrid in the first place. So he can't, like, really do anything about it. But Jessica is like, look, I'll pay you. He's like, well, I want 10 million marks. So Jessica's like, put it on my tab. Because apparently she has a tab with the astronomer. So he leaves. And so we learned that Jessica wanted Hypaxia to come to resurrect Sigrid. So Hypaxia used to be the queen of the witches, but what we learn is that somebody named Morganthia has basically exiled her. So they, even in the last book, they didn't really like how Hypaxia was running things. They didn't like Hypaxia because she wasn't raised, like, with them or whatever. So they basically were like, hey, look, you can leave or we can kill you. So she was like, I'll leave. And they said, okay, we're still going to kill you. So she ran, and so she's basically coming to join the House of Flame and Shadow. And Jessica's, like, kind of shitty because she's like, now that Hypatia is not the queen anymore, like Hypatia's only friends were ghosts. Like they were really all ghosts. And so now she's not queen, so they like killed off her ghost friends. And she's sad about it. And Jessica's like, you're sad about people that have already been dead for hundreds of years, but like your people needed you. And she's like, they were gonna kill me. And she said, okay, so die with honor. Like, what's up? Like, I don't know, like do better, basically. And I'm kind of like, I mean, I kind of feel like actually I don't want to die either, but you know, like that's why I don't want to be queen. So there's that. But we learned that Jessica is actually the second in command in the House of Flame and Shadow. So Hypatia actually answers to her now. And we learned that, like, so Hypatia is like, look, I'm going to work on Sigrid tomorrow, but, like, apparently House of Flame and Shadow is weird, and she has to, like, swear all of these oaths and stuff today to the Underking before she can, like, officially be a part of the house. And so she leaves, and Jessica is like, Hypatia is just a fool. She's like Bryce. And she mentions her relationship with Celestina, and Ethan's like, what? I'm sorry. I didn't know that. Excusez-moi. And Jessica's like, well, like, they're not really together anymore because Celestina sold out all of Hypatia's friends. So, like, Hypatia was pissed about that, obviously. So we go back to the boat, and Lydia gets to visit her sons one last time before they're getting off in Avalon. And Ace is still, like, kind of hateful to her, but Lydia wants to give them her ring, which is a ruby ring, and it's a family heirloom that she got from her dad, and she gives it to Bran. And she tells them, like, you know, I didn't have any choice but to leave you guys here as babies. Like, that's why I left you. So we go back over to Jessica and Ethan, and Jessica tells Ethan that, like, she deflected from the witches because she didn't like the direction in which the witches were going originally. And Ethan says, like, nobody even knows that you're this high up in command in the House of Flame and Shadow. And she's like, yeah, because we don't talk over here. We don't run our mouths. We have secrets. And he's like, okay, so, like, what's your deal with the astronomer? Like, why do you have a tab with him, basically? And so she says that, basically, like, first she's like, I'm tired of your questions. But then she's like, okay, look. So she's like, when Apollyon, like, cursed her or whatever, like, he sent Adis to, like, check on her. So that's when her and Adis kind of became friends. And so then she, like, hooked up with the astronomer. So the astronomer is looking for a way to break the spell from Apollyon. And he's also looking for the spell because the astronomer used to be human, but then, like, the evilness, like, took over. And he does not want to die. So he's also trying to figure out a way to, like, save himself. So Jessica tells Ethan that, like, the wolves are actually the ones who hunted, like, her people to extinction. But they were, like, bred by the Asteri. And he's like, what do you mean? And she says that, you know, the Fendirs were bred specifically to be the way that they are. And that the Asteri just pull the strings behind everything. And they're like, he's like, why would they kill Danica? And he's like, or Jessica's like, well, because they couldn't control Danica like they could Sabine. And she's like, yeah, they basically, like, set Mike up to do that. And he's like, no. And she's like, yeah. Yeah. The Asteri did all of that. But Hypatia calls and is like, Ethan, you can come down to the morgue. So back with our guys on the boat. So the depth charger stops at Avalon, and like they can't get all the way up there because there's like the mist, and then there's like a water wall that blocks them. So like Bryce goes over to Theron and is like, you know, hang in there, stay strong, friend, whatever. And she, you know, she pulls out her sword and she like creates like a wall in the mist so that they can go through, and like a white boat comes up and it's like King Morven, and he's like, good evening, why are you here? Did you call first? And so Bryce and everybody's like getting off, and Therian is like, you know what? Not staying on the boat. He hops on the boat with them, and he's like, toodles, because he's over the wall. You know, the next book is supposed to be The House of Many Waters, which means I know that we're going to, like, I feel like we're going to focus on Therian. And I don't know that I love that. Because he irritates me so bad. Like, you idiot.
He is.
Like, just, like, no thoughts. There's nothing up in that pretty head. Is the light even on? So, back to Jessica. And basically, like, Jessica, Ethan, and Hypatia are in the morgue. And she's like, I had to keep people from eating her body. Because obviously, like, you know, we got the vamps and, like, the other, like, demons and stuff down in the House of Flame and Shadow. And, like, they hang out there. Like, all of the houses have, like, a clubhouse, basically. Like, they all could go there. So Hypatia is like, okay, well, first I have to reattach her head. So they're working on that. So Bryce arrives in Morven's throne room. And Morven is like, females are not allowed to speak here. And then... like, Therian tries to speak, and he's like, okay, you also are disgraced, so you cannot speak here. And so Bryce says, on a count of 3, raise your hand if you are a female or you've been disgraced or disowned by your family. And everybody raises their hand except for Tristan. Flynn. But we learned that Flynn's parents... What?
No. Yeah.
Oh, well, we're going to stop here. So I was like, I don't know. But Flynn's parents have run to Avalon, and they have his sister because she is a little spicy too. And Bryce is also pissed at Therian because she's like, I don't want to talk to you right now because like we have enough enemies, and now we have the Ocean Queen, the River Queen, and the Viper Queen that are all looking for you on top of all the other shit that's going on here. So yeah, that's it. I think I'm gonna stop there. All right. Anything to add for this part? It's about to get good after this part, so
yeah,
that's
lots about to happen.
A lot.
Yeah.
Okay. So we are probably. I mean, I didn't look like in the book. I don't know if we're halfway through part 2 or if we're almost to part 3, but this is about halfway through the book, so I actually like check this time because normally I just assume, and then I'm like, I have one really long episode and one really short episode. So this is about halfway through. So next week we will finish out the rest of this book and then cover the bonus chapters as well, and then give our thoughts and opinions and theories and all that good stuff too. So anything else?
I don't believe so.
All right. Well, we will talk to you guys next week. So make sure you are following us on TikTok. Oh, I should have said at the beginning. Yes. We are on a journey to get 1,000 TikTok followers. So if you are still listening, thank you. But actually, before we even do that, when we get to 500, we want to do a giveaway. We're giving away one free audiobook from Libro FM. So I think we're like almost to 400. So tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend that they all have to follow us on TikTok and on all the socials, but we're specifically focused on TikTok right now, and you can find us there at Booktrospective. So on all of the socials, but that's our goal right now.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, that is all I have. So talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.